Hello dear students, welcome back. Today we will do a review of grammar that we have studied during B2 level. As you can remember, we started with our tenses and we went in depth more than B1 that we have studied the tenses. We started with the most basic that we all know, present tenses, which is present simple and present progressive. Let's remind ourselves, what have we done? What have we learned so far? We said that when do we use present simple? We have some areas that we use with present simple, starting with routines. Actions that takes place regularly, frequently. We talked about scientific facts. Also, we said that we have some stative verbs which we use with present simple. We also have timetables. For example, the boarding hours of plane. It can be plane, bus, train. We're talking about timetables. And we talked about how we use present simple in sentences. What's the grammar rule here? We said that we use verb 1 form in present simple. The only thing that changed, according to our subject pronouns, is that we use verb S form with subject pronouns, which are he, she, it. And then, if I am creating a sentence using I, you, we, they as the subject of the sentence, I use verb bear, which is, we can say, verb 1. This is the affirmative sentence form we use in present simple. Routines, actions that happen regularly or frequently. We can talk about habits. And we are using present simple to make statements about scientific facts. Also, when we are using stative verbs in our sentence. Or we have timetables, which it can be boarding of plane or bus or train. We use present simple in these areas. We will go and examine each of them. But before that, let's have a look at our time expressions that we use with present simple tense. We can divide into two this category in present simple because first of all, we have frequency time expressions, or we can say frequency adverbs, and we have the other time expressions, the other category. Let's start with this one. These resemble our actions. How frequent do they occur? Let's start with always. We are talking about something, some action that happens all the time. We have usually, which again, we are talking about an action that happens most of the time. So let's say 90%. We have generally, another frequency time expression. Again, they are equal to each other, usually and generally. So I can again say 90% for generally. We have often, again, it can happen pretty often. We're talking about something that happens on a regular basis. So let's say 80%. Then we have sometimes, let's say 40% to this. We have rarely another frequency time expression, which we can say 20%, hardly ever, we don't almost do it. It's not an action that happens generally. And we have never, 0%. So these represents on what frequency we make those actions. Alongside with these, we also have other time expressions we use during present simple. For example, every day or every morning, every night, every Tuesday, every month, every week. It's not a wrong thing to say if you see a time expression that starts with every, and if we're talking about a present tense, it is a present simple one. Or I can use, for example, on Fridays or on weekends. We add a plural s to the end of this time expression because actually it almost gives the same meaning with every. And also we have, for example, once a day or twice a week, or let's say 3 times a year. These are the most common ones that we use with present simple. Let's have a look at them in the sentence, but before that, the reason that I divided this category as frequency time expressions and the others is that frequency time expressions comes right after the subject. The placement of these time expressions are different than the other ones we use. For example, she never smokes. Be careful with the placement of the time expression. We usually go to Istanbul on holidays. I clean and tidy my house every day. The placement is important again, as you can see. She often goes to gym. We brush our teeth twice a day. These are some of the examples for the time expressions that we mentioned. Be careful with the time expression because it is important to differ it from other tenses we use, because every tense in English has its own time expressions. Let's talk about scientific facts. Why do we use present simple when we are talking about scientific facts? Because, first of all, it is something that can be proven and the second thing is it doesn't change. They happen all the time. And these rules apply for present simple as well. That's why it is a perfect category to use present simple with. Let's give an example. For water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, for example. It is always like this. It cannot be changed. It cannot be something different. This is a scientific fact and we can prove it. Or sun sets in the west, for example. World turns around itself, for example. Again, these are things that we can prove, and they happen all the time. They cannot be changed. So that's why we use scientific facts with present simple. Then we talked about stative verbs. What are these? Stative verbs, they don't represent action. They tell us a situation. That's why we call them stative verbs. What are those? All emotion verbs. For example, love, hate, like, dislike, enjoy, and etc. Also, we have other verbs, for example, believe, need, understand, belong, want, notice, realize, see, feel, think, understand, we said that one, have, and etc. These are stative verbs that we cannot use with any progressive tense. We only use them with simple tenses. This is our rule with stative verbs. I believe you are right. A stative verb. You don't need a time expression to tell if a sentence is present simple or not. If there's a stative verb, you can understand clearly that this is a present simple sentence. She thinks, let's say, ghosts are real. Our stative verb in the sentence. I need help. Need is a state verb, that's why we use it like this. Even if it's happening right now, even if we want to give a progressive meaning, we cannot use it in a progressive form. I have 2 sisters, but there is an exception when it comes to have, because it has 2 meanings that we use. First is to own something. It represents that the person owns something. But the second one is we turn it into a phrasal verb. For example, have breakfast, have a shower, have picnic, have some snacks, have a break. In the second category, it doesn't give the meaning of owning something. It loses its meaning. So, in the second category, we can make it progressive. So, you have to look at the meaning, what meaning have give us in that sentence. It is very important. For example, she has a big house. In the sentence, it is equal to own. But, for example, she is having lunch at the moment. In here, this is a phrasal verb. In this example, it is not equal to own. That's why we can make it progressive, but we cannot make the first sentence progressive. It has to be in present simple. Let's have a look at the negative form of present simple. With he, she, it subject pronouns, we use does not, which we can shorten it as doesn't, verb 1. With are, we, they pronouns, subject pronouns, we use do not, which we can shorten as don't, and verb 1. Let's give some examples. I don't think this house is expensive. You can see the stative verb here, and I made it a negative sentence. She doesn't enjoy watching horror movies. We don't go to Paris often. As you can see, we use don't, do not, or doesn't with he, she, its subject pronouns in negative sentences. But you have to be careful with verb 1 after doesn't, because we don't add another s at the end of our verb because it's already on doesn't. What about the question form? We take do and does into the beginning of the sentence. Then our subject of the sentence, again, verb 1, no s this time either because it is again on does, object, place, time, etc. Does she come here often? For example, this is a typical yes-no question. You can remember it from B1 level. We have studied this. This is a yes-no question because it starts with an auxiliary verb, not with a WH question word. I can answer it in two ways. Yes, she does. This is our short answer. If I want to give a long answer, I can say, yes, she comes here often. You have to be careful with this does, because in a short answer, we can say it, but in the long one, we can't. Why? Because if you don't see yes in the long answer, this is actually a full affirmative sentence. That's why there is no does in it, because we don't use does with affirmative sentences. And that's why we omit does in the long answer. Let's give the negative answer. No, she doesn't is my short answer. No, she doesn't come here often. But this time, doesn't is in both of these answers, in the short one and in the long one. Why is that? Because, again, if you don't see the no in the beginning of the answer, this is a full sentence on its own. And we already use doesn't in a negative sentence. And this is the reason why we use does in short affirmative answer and why we don't in long affirmative answer, and we use doesn't in both of them. Okay. Now let's do a different question type. Where do you go for working out? Now, when it comes to WH questions, which are what, who, where, when, how, whose, which. When we are using a WH question form, we put WH questions in the beginning of the sentence. And then tense doesn't matter. What tense are we talking about? It depends on the sentence. Then our auxiliary verb, which in this case it is do, and then our verb, and then object, After auxiliary verb, we use subject and then correct verb form. It depends on the tense we are talking about. I will again talk about this auxiliary verb thing because it's going to be very helpful for you. Let's give an answer to this one. This time we can only have one answer because it is a specific question. For example, I go to gym, which is near my home. Now, let's talk about this auxiliary verb subject. Now, in every tense, our auxiliary verb changes. And how do we find them? For example, when we are talking about present simple, in the negative form, we use don't and doesn't, which is actually do not and does not. And does is the version of do which gets s. So, let me write it again. You have to look at the negative form in that tense, first of all. Do not and does not. You are going to omit not, and you are left with do and does. Now, does is the form of do that gets s, so I also omit does, and we are left with do. Let's have a look at, for example, past simple. In this case, in the negative sentence, we use did not. We are going to omit not. We are left with did. It doesn't change depending on the subject, so this is my auxiliary verb. Let's have a talk about present perfect. In this case, in our negative sentence form, we use haven't or hasn't. We are going to omit not, and we are left with have, has. Has is the form of have, which we form according to our subject in the sentence, and you are left with have, which is our auxiliary verb for present perfect. Let's have a look at past perfect. Look at the negative sentence. We use hadn't as our auxiliary verb. Omit not, we are left with had, and it doesn't change depending on the subject we're using. So had our is our auxiliary verb. This is important. It's going to be very helpful when we're talking about reported speech, WH questions, passive voice. So I would recommend you to study them, but not memorize them, because this is a pretty logical thing. There's a rule here, so you can learn easily. Okay, we talked about auxiliary verb. Before that, we were talking about WH questions, which we said that according to tense we are using in that sentence, we have our auxiliary verb, then our subject of the sentence, and the correct verb form, again, depending on the tense we're talking about. So, we are done with present simple. Now, we are going to talk about present progressive or continuous, whichever you would like to call. Where do we use present progressive? First of all, of course, we're using present progressive to talk about actions that are happening right now. This is the main reason why we use present progressive, but there are also other categories we use present progressive with. The second one is temporary situations or actions. And the last one is, we're talking about planned feature. This is, and also when we are making complaints. These are the four main areas we use present progressive. What is our grammar rule? After our subject, we use be verb 1 form, and if I want to, not if I want to, we use verb ing. We add ing at the end of our verb. For example, I am running to catch the bus. This is an action that is happening right now, so I wrote down this sentence using present progressive. My subject pronoun in this sentence is I. That's why my be verb 1 form is am. My verb is running, so I add ing at the end of it. Let's have a look at the time expressions that we use with present progressive. Here we have 4 categories, and 3 of them refer to different times actually. One of them refers now, one of them is again now but in a more wide range, and the third one refers to the future. So we are going to use different time expressions for different purposes. For actions that are happening now, we can use at the moment, at the time being, or we can use warnings like look, listen. These are used pretty often. Or I can say right now and etc. If we are talking about temporary situations, we can use nowadays, we can use currently. For example, this week or this month. We have a wider range time period than now, And we can refer to planned future. We can use tomorrow, next week, next day, next, let's say, Saturday, next weekend. For example, we can use these time expressions depending on the time we are talking about. We also have, I'm going to separate here, we also have complaints. When we are complaining about something and when we are using present progressive, we use always and never. Now, this can be actually quite confusing because when we see always or never, these are frequency adverbs, and directly we want to do that question or sentence present simple. But if there's a complaint in that sentence, and if there's always or never, we are going to use present progressive. Let's give some examples. For example, the complaint, you are always coming late for, let's say, meeting. This is a complaint. So you can see the frequency adverb always, and you can see the present progressive form. Or she's never cleaning her room. Again, normally we wouldn't do such thing. Normally we don't use frequency adverbs with present progressive, but in this case, in this category of present progressive, we do. Let's give an example for temporary situation. For example, I am looking for a job currently. This is a temporary situation. It is not just happening right now, but rather it is in a more wide time period. She's staying in a hotel this week. Again, a temporary situation. We're having dinner tomorrow at a nice restaurant. Do you want to join? In the first one, you can see that have in the sentence doesn't mean own. So I use present progressive because it refers to a future plan. And in the second sentence, you can see the state verb. So we used present progressive in the first sentence and present simple in the second one. In this one, we understand that this action is happening right now. She's never calling me. In this one, again, you can see the complaint we're talking about. Okay, now let's look at the differences between present simple and present progressive. How are we going to differentiate between them? In present simple, we are talking about actions that happen regularly, or scientific facts, or timetables, or stative verbs. But in present progressive, we are talking about actions that are happening now or currently, or in a close future that we have planned, or when we are making complaints, when we are complaining about something. The first thing you're going to look at is the time expressions. If there's a question and you don't know which one to pick, you have to look at the time expression first. We have studied the time expressions we use with present simple and present progressive, so each of them has their own time expressions. Second one, if there is no time expression in the sentence, we are going to look at stative verb. And it goes directly to present simple. Okay, let's say that there's no stative verb, but there is a timetable. Then again, goes here. If there is, we look at the time expression and there's always or never, but the meaning contains complain, so it goes to present progressive side. Also, okay, let's say that it's not a stative verb in the sentence. There's no time expression, no complaint, no timetable. But there is something that can be proven. So again, it goes to present simple. Okay guys, that's it for today's lesson. I hope you understood and enjoyed it. Please make sure that you study and review all the grammar topics we have studied so far. We will continue with more grammar reviews in our next lesson. Take care of yourselves. See you on our next lesson.